So, advanced hypertrophy concepts is the meta topic for today. And it says right there, novel hypotheses. So usually when I go on tour, so to speak, with my RP colleagues, we usually go through kind of a general nutrition or training or recovery or psychology presentation. We do a couple of advanced tips maybe at the end, and then we go to questions. The thing is, how many of you folks have seen my online stuff and read some of the books and articles and stuff like that? Yeah. So you guys are all caught up to speed, and you were warned in advance before you bought tickets, I think, that this is going to be an advanced discussion. So the stuff that I'm talking with you guys about today is just on that borderline of stuff that I think is a pretty fine idea and is likely to be true. But I can't guarantee the truth value of anything here nearly to the extent that I can to what's in our books and what's in my online presentations. Because that stuff is much more rock solid. These are, by definition, novel hypotheses, new ideas that I have been tinkering with and are probably on the money. And we're here to kind of explore them together and find out how much merit they have. So if you think they're bullshit and you got a good question to stump my ass, by all means, shoot your hand up. I'll call on you. And, if some of this turns out to just not be true, we can just fucking drop it right here. You know what I mean? Most of you are familiar with my approach to intellectual credulity, but just as a review, I am not a pope. I do not have wisdom from on high. I make mistakes all the fucking time. My way is not the highway, and I'm very open-minded to new alternate ideas. You'll never offend me with any questions that you have. Please feel free to be as skeptical as possible when you're asking questions. Like, what about this? Ask. That's why you're here. That's why you paid really good money to be here. Does that make sense? And worst case scenario, be like, fuck, you got me. I have no idea that I can wrong. And sweet, if you point out that I'm wrong, I can stop being wrong and start being more correct. And we can all be better off for it. Does that make sense? Yeah. And everyone in the field is like that, I guess. Lyle is like that. He's more like that than me. Super open-minded. Lyle McDonald, you guys familiar with who that is? I want to see that motherfucker in person. Yeah. I would never do that. I would pull deep halfway. All right, so advanced hypertrophy concepts. Here are the contents. This is going to take us all day long. So the first one is going to be the first one. We have a nutrition chat on a high-carb, low-fat dietary hypothesis. We'll get into what that means in a bit. We're going to talk about training. A couple of points, separate topics. One is training frequency over the career span. I have a debate, a formal debate about at a conference in Amsterdam with Menno Henselman? I could have made that up. Is it like a plural last name? I've never seen that before. How do you actually say that? Please help me out. Anyone? Henselmans. So it's just exactly as it's spelled. Did you make that up, or you just sound overly confident?
I'm from Germany.
He's not from Germany.
No, but it's kind of similar.
You're going to get me in trouble. I'm going to show up and he'll be like, that's really offensive. That's not my name. Anyway, I have a debate about training frequency with him in a couple of days, I guess. So that's going to be fun. You guys will get a little preview of that. Delayed onset muscle soreness and hypertrophy. I have some ideas about that seemingly contrast with a lot of individuals in the evidence-based community. I'm not really sure why. And every time people ask me how I could hold such ludicrous views, I will describe to you today how I don't think they're very ludicrous. But obviously I'm open to debate. And on nutrition and training, nutraceutical concordance over the macrocycle, lining up your training nutrition to get optimal results over the entire preparatory macrocycle of the body composition situation. I had a big revelation on this as I was writing this presentation, so you guys will be the first humans in the world. I was going to say outside of Jared Feather, but he's not human, so still the first humans in the world to get a taste of what I believe is a really cool alignment of nutrition and training that makes a whole lot of sense. And if you guys can bring your skeptical mindset to it and shit test it for me, I would be very much appreciative, so that I could go on to more conferences and be more correct and make even more money. And then I'll have more money, and that'll be awesome. And then I can finally shop in London. Holy fuck. Or like driving around and it's like a Rolex store with more expensive watches than Rolex. So like if someone has a Rolex, like people in that store sneer at them like, Rolex, really? But every other car is like a Mercedes and shit. It's really weird. You guys are used to it, I assume. Who's not from London? And it's fucking weird here for you guys. These rich cunts. Is that cool to say? So in the U.S. we can't say cunt without people getting like really offended. So I'm just trying to. I'm going to Australia later, so I'm warming up. Because there it's like, you know, whatever, bro. All right. So first idea and chat for the day. If you have a question, comment, or concern, get fucked. No, I'm just kidding. Just raise your hand, and I'll notice and call on you, and we'll just do that. We'll have time for Q&A at the end of each talk, but we can also do some like really pertinent. So if it's Q&A that you think you should better save for the end, perfect. You can just save it for the end. But if you think it's really pertinent for that particular time and place, just shoot your hand up, and we'll get to it. Sound good? Cool. All right. So, or if you want me to clear anything up or anything, by all means. So, first of all, I have a coach. If you're not familiar with who he is, you should get familiar. His name is Broderick Chavez. What does he say, Crystal? Chavez? He's trying to be all fancy. Fuck that. It's Chavez, okay? I'm not changing the way I say some shit for him. And he has been helping me in my bodybuilding for the last half year or something like that on the pharmacological aspects, because I know a lot about nutrition. I know a lot about training. Pharma, I'm like, and people are like, yeah, the first thing he told me was like, you have a PhD in sport physiology, how come you don't know anything about pharma? And I'm like, they don't teach you that shit in school, motherfucker. They're like, yeah, here's how to use drugs. There's no class on that. It's a weird surprise. So I kind of brought him on to do that, and he knows, like, he's like really good friends with Lyle, which is like a good and a bad thing, which means he's also insane, which is completely true, but also brilliant, which is completely true. And he sort of brought to my attention the formative version of this idea that I'm going to share with you. I put some scientific terms to it and really expounded on why this high-carb, low-fat muscle gain idea may have some very good merit. All right? So let's first take a look at the standard ideas in the evidence-based community and just as science has presented them and practice has presented them. And then once we're familiar with the standard ideas of how to gain muscle and how to gain weight, then we are going to look at the modified version of that that potentially have some merits for it. You guys all see the screen okay? Everyone can read that okay? All right, so sounds good. So first point is protein has to meet needs, about 2 grams of protein per kilo of body mass per day, and we're really not ever going to mention protein again except for one time just to be like, yeah, protein's there. All right, so we're not going to modify protein. This is not really up for debate. Every now and again, people get really pedantic and start debating, like, ooh, I thought it was 1.9. Like, yeah, motherfucker, you're going to count a 0.1 in your day? Fuck out of here. Nobody's going to do that. So 2 grams per kilo or somewhere thereabouts, 1 gram per pound, we're good on protein. Okay, so we got that. Carbs, at minimum, have to meet activity needs. This is why a super low carb or a paleo approach to mass phase doesn't really work super well, because you burn through glycogen, and you have to have carbohydrates to power your nervous system when you're training. So anywhere between 2 and 6 grams per kilo per day is where your carbs kind of have to be, depending on your training volume and activity, at the minimum to make sure you get what you need to get. So it's not up for debate. So low carb's not in the discussion anymore. This is the 2 to 6 grams per kilo is our bottom end number. The question we're going to ask a little bit later is it a good idea to have even more carbohydrates than that? And the more will no longer be filling training needs, it's going to be doing something a little bit different for us. Lastly, we have fats, which should be at minimum at least around 0.6 grams per kilo. So if you have 100 kilos, that's 60 grams of fat per day. Can we go lower than that and still be okay? Probably, right? Some individuals have gone much lower and been fine. Some individuals drop much lower and they stop having sex drive, stop having desire to train, and they wither away and die. I'm one of those individuals. I've experimented. So I weigh like around anywhere between 100 and 110 when I'm prepping. And if I go below 45 grams of fat, my hunger goes like that. And my sex drive completely disappears, which is actually kind of convenient at times. And then the training intensity, desire to train, and ability to recover are just basically gone, right? So most individuals, the value I'm comfortable with giving is 0.6. If you can do lower, cool. But don't expect to have a good time if lower than that. But the good news is almost no one needs more than that. If you are iso or hypercaloric and you're getting at least that much fat, there's no demonstration either in the literature, in analogical reasoning, or in practical experience of most people saying that there's a good idea to have more. So if someone told you, oh, you need at least 1 gram per kilogram per day of fats, they would have an uphill battle in trying to convince you why that's the case. Does that make sense? So it's by no means clear you need any more than that. As a matter of fact, you probably don't. But that's the minimum for sure. So, getting into the actual hypothesis that we're playing around here with. So, protein is constant. We know that. Carbs meet needs for sure. We know that. Next question is, how do we fill the calorie gap? Because as you well know, for when you're gaining muscle, dieting is a little bit different. You're going to hit your protein calories. You're going to fill in your carb calories. You're going to fit in your minimum fat calories, 0.6 per kilo. And then after that, you've got like between 1,000 and sometimes 3,000 calories left over to fill in to actually get hypercaloric. So you can meet all of your training needs and you're very well hypocaloric at the time. So if you get 2 grams per kilo of protein up to like 4 grams per kilo of carbohydrate and 0.6 grams per kilo of fat, usually for most individuals, that leaves them quite hypocaloric. So that's a fat loss plan. So the next question is, okay, so we have all these met, where do we add in calories? And there are fundamentally a couple of different options. We can add them using more protein. So say, okay, I have 1,000 calories left to get hypercaloric. I'm just going to eat more protein to get there. We'll think about that in a second if that's a good idea. You could say, I'm just going to eat more carbs to get there. You could say, I'm going to eat more fats to get there. Or you could say, what's one that we left out here? Alcohol. I'm just kidding. Technically, yes. Okay, so 2 that we left out. We got alcohol. What else? I'd like to see that one. Be like, yeah, when I'm massing, I just have like more whiskey. When I'm cutting, I stop drinking. Like, shit. You would look very different from off-season to contest, but not much better. So, what do you guys say? What do we leave out here as a potential hypothesis? It's kind of a trick question. Yeah, more of everything. Yeah, just like an even split or some kind of exotic combination. A lot of it's just like eat more junk food and it's got some protein, some carbs, some fat, and just fill up your calories with it. So let's take a look at each one of these. Protein. This is almost, this is always blasphemy in the bodybuilding.com world. Like, the standard advice is like, oh, I can't gain weight. What's the standard advice for bros? They eat more protein, bro. Like, okay, what if you're already eating 2 grams per kilo? Does eating more protein actually make you gain muscle? Fuck, I really wish that was the case. You could just trick your body into gaining more muscle by feeding it more protein. But it's been shown pretty reliably that after about 2 grams per kilo, not much happens. You can eat 4 grams per kilo, and you don't gain any more muscle than you normally would. As a matter of fact, on a massing phase, and Menno, Henselmans, and others have made a pretty convincing case for this, on a massing phase, because you have so many carbs and so many fats coming in, you can actually get away with lower protein and still be at optimal muscle gain rates at 1.6 grams per kilo and stuff like that seem just fine. So if someone's like, oh, you got to eat more protein when you're massing to fill in that calorie gap, can you eat more protein and be okay with it? Yeah, sure. Do you have to? Is there some kind of like exotic advantage? Probably not. It's very unlikely. And it's oftentimes people's first guess is, oh, you just eat more protein. Well, Yahoo, I wish that was the case. Just to address that question, some people say, well, I'm on a shitload of gear. Can't I eat more protein? No. Here's why. Yes, you can make use of more protein, but also what's called your feed efficiency goes up. So the protein you have in your gut, actually more of it goes to your musculature if you're on gear than if you're not. So the two kind of cancel each other out. It turns out that people on steroids need just about as much protein as everybody else. Ta-da! So I've seen some weird shit. Guys eating like 100 grams of protein per meal, and they're like, I'm on enough shit, man. It makes sense. And
Have they actually studied that with people using steroids and taking excessive amounts of protein, or is that just a hypothesis with the feed efficiency?
The feed efficiency has been well established in pretty much every single animal we've ever tested. It's been established in humans through like HIV wasting studies and stuff like that. They have never overfed bodybuilders, to my knowledge, that were on gear an excessive amount of protein and demonstrated lack of growth. It would be highly surprising if that were the case. And also, it's quite clear from just typical bodybuilding practices that there's no consensus in bodybuilding world that a ton more protein than a gram per pound is what's going to get you to grow. And some guys eat a little less than that and actually get away with it just fine. So could there be a potential for direct study of that? Yes. Is it something that I'm like really itching to study directly? Well, absolutely not. When you confirm in every single animal and in humans that you have a feed efficiency advantage with anabolics, and the muscular pathways. So when you take gear, the another question is how much more percent growth do you get? The answer is just it's just a fucking crazy amount. You don't wake up the next day after your first shot of tren like, oh, fuck, I'm fucking huge. So if it was going to be more protein, it would be like 10 grams a day more or something like that. The feed efficiency is way more than that even. So there are some people have been a little cocksuckerish about this and offer the idea that if you're on gear, you can actually get away with less protein and still make better gains, which might actually be true. Would I recommend less protein for people on anabolics? No, I would just say eat the same and you're a very, very, very safe bet. Does that make sense? Are you simply scratching your hand or is that a question?
Oh no, that's a scratch. So,
so if we want to get our calories in from more stuff, is this too loud by the way? Loud enough? Decent? Okay. Excess protein, not the best place to start. Not advantageous for growth. Fats have some of their advantages, however. So protein actually, one downside is it's pretty expensive. Like, you're buying more meat, it can get pricey. And it's a real giant pain in the ass to eat. Like, imagine your mass-based calories and now make like 50% more of them protein and take out some carbs and fat. Like, how much fucking chicken breast can you chew until you're like, fuck this, I'm done with bodybuilding? Like, not much. So fats have an advantage that they're super cheap, they're easy to eat, and they're really tasty. Adding fats to everything makes it taste better. However, the excess of intake of fats past what you need to boost muscle growth for that hypercaloric environment seemingly has no positive hormonal effect that's anything to write about. Okay? Your testosterone levels seem to be quite maximized at the minimum fat intake. Anything greatly above that just doesn't seem to have any kind of crazy hormonal impact. But the vast majority of excess fat is stored as fat. One of the most profoundly unbelievable things I've ever heard. You hear this shit all the time. You will continue to hear it long after all of us are fucking dead. I guarantee this shit will still be around. Don't eat excess carbs. They're stored as fat. What the fuck do you think excess fats are stored as, motherfucker? They don't even have to get processed. They just go right into the fucking fat cell just as they are. Boom, 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 boom. That's it. Carbs, there's like some machinery that has to go and some efficiency loss. So yeah, you can store carbs as fat pretty efficiently, but it's not as efficiently as fats. So the big problem is any calories you have excess that come from fats, once they boost all the muscle function, which is really good, we need that, then you're talking about some pretty serious fat gains, okay? Problem. That's a problem, for sure. Here, what about carbs? If you eat excess carbs, yes, that will lead to fat storage. I can't sit here and tell you carbs don't deposit to fat. They sure as hell do. And they do something else. Even if you have your minimum fat intakes, your carbohydrates, if you eat carbs and fat at the same time, what happens is your body will almost always preferentially use carbohydrates for current energy-based functions. Okay? So if you have carbs and fats come in, the body goes, ooh, carbs, and it'll just use them. And what do you think it does with the fat that you eat if it's just using carbs and you eat it? It just deposits the fat. So excess carbohydrate, even if it's not itself anabolized into fat tissue, pushes out everything else, and then excess everything else gets anabolized into fat tissue. Does that make sense? So at the very least, carbs will also make you fatter if you eat them, but probably not directly as much as excess dietary fat. So if you overeat carbohydrates chronically with relatively low fat intakes versus overeat fats chronically, you'll probably end up a little bit less fat on excess carbohydrates. It's not by much. We're probably talking about 5 or 10% difference. Well, like over the long term, that might add up to something, right? Not the big advantage of super high carb intakes hypothetically. However, here's where things really start to get fun. Every time you generate a hypercaloric condition with carbohydrate, if you eat a lot of carbohydrate, something magical happens, and insulin is that magic. So when you overeat fats, you definitely check off the hypercaloric condition, right? If you eat more fats than your body needs, and of course enough protein and carbs, you are hypercaloric, and you are hormonally and intracellular, etc., off to a good start on building more muscle. For sure, you've checked the box of getting hypercaloric. With overeating carbohydrates, you definitely check the hypercaloric box just the same. But you also secrete insulin that is not secreted when you consume excess fats. Okay? Fat consumption does not cause insulin spike similar to that of carbohydrates. Some protein consumption does, but most of those studies are on whey protein. If you drop a vial of insulin into yourself and then eat chicken breast and be like, it's cool, this will turn into carbs or whatever, you're just going to drop dead. Okay, don't do that. So, yes, protein has an insulinergic effect, but only whey hydro is the stuff that compares to carbohydrates. Everything else is much less insulinergic. And fat is pretty much not insulinergic at all. As a matter of fact, it's counter-insulinergic. So every time you eat fat in your food, you get less insulin secretion or less of a spike. So what it comes down to is if you generate that hypercaloric condition with carbohydrates versus with fats, you get more overall through the day chronic secretion of insulin than you do with an excess fat diet. Important fact. Important fact. We'll come back to why that's important. So, the potential advantage to filling in your calorie needs to get hypercaloric with carbohydrates is that, first of all, insulin will drive more muscle anabolism. What does that mean? Fundamentally, can insulin drive fat cell anabolism? Can insulin make you fatter if you have the extra calories? Fuck yeah. Okay, so insulin absolutely causes fat storage. It's a fat storage hormone. But it also causes muscle storage to occur, or muscle accretion. It is an anabolic hormone. Right? Sometimes people comically insinuate that insulin is not anabolic. Right, that's why guys in the IFBB are slamming fucking 100 IUs a day, because it doesn't fucking grow muscle. Fuck out of here. You guys know who Jean-Pierre Fou is? Old bodybuilder from the 90s? Any questions about insulin, just direct to his physique. So, in case Ronnie Coleman, okay, 287 pounds at the Olympia, insulin is an anabolic. Hilarious. So, insulin is greatly anabolic, especially when combined with other things, but on its own, anabolic. Insulin is not very acutely anabolic. So if you have a post-workout shake, you're like, fuck yeah, insulin, I'm gonna get fucking huge. That's like having a testosterone spike for 2 hours. Does it make you huge? No. Does testosterone administered when it has no flux over the course of the day, high average testosterone? Greatly anabolic. Same idea with insulin. If you have chronic high exposure to high carbohydrates that cause a lot of insulin secretion, you're going to be benefiting from this, which will grow you some fat, for sure. But if you want to know how to stay completely lean on a mass phase, I can't offer you that shit in here. Fucking magic. You're in the wrong conference room. You need to be in like a fucking supplement company conference room down the hall or something. It's like, our new supplement will allow you to stay lean all the time or some shit. So yeah, you will gain fat, but the advantage with that insulin is that it also causes hypertrophy of the musculature at the same time. Does excess fat cause hypertrophy of the musculature? Probably not to any magical extent. Does that make sense? So if you have tons more fat than your body needs, the downside is you get fatter, okay? But do you get much more muscular than you otherwise would? Probably not anything more than the hypercaloric condition can offer you. If you have more carbohydrate than you need by a long shot, do you get fatter? Yes. Can you also potentially get more muscular because of that enhanced insulin drive? Maybe. That's why it's a hypothesis. I'd say probably. Right? Yes?
Does that mean on a non-training day you'd keep your carbohydrate fairly high?
Maybe. Yeah, that would be one of the many implications. Right, so when I told Broderick that I was doing low carbs on non-training days, he's like, why? Fuck. I have to explain shit. I'm like, I'm paying you, damn it. Don't you ask me why. So just to rephrase that, extra dietary fat, this is the big hypothesis, right, just goes to adipose tissue. But excess dietary carbs do that for sure. They make you fatter as well and stimulate some extra muscle growth via insulin. So when we compare the two, it turns out that the higher insulin conditions of high carb, low fat, right? So we have an option of where to put our extra nutrients. We're going to try to shrink down the fat component and really expand the carbohydrate component of our excess of our hypercaloric nutrients. Maybe we'll get some more insulin with that. Maybe that'll work, right? So the net possible result from this is that high carbs paired with low fats in a hypercaloric condition might lead to more muscle gain per kilo of tissue gain and thus potentially less fat, right? Because if you gain 5 kilos and 3 kilos of that is muscle as opposed to 2 like it always is, then of course you've gained less fat, right? It's either you gain muscle or fat, and obviated for body water. That's the really big hypothesis, okay? A couple of quick confounders before we get to questions and intricacies, etc. People look at that and they go, fuck, you're just going to get diabetes eating all those excess carbs. So it says right there, unlikely via rat studies of fat overfeeding. Let me ask you guys a question. If you want to cause type 2 diabetes in the rat model, which means you have rats in your lab, and you want to make them type 2 diabetics so you can study the new drug, what is the most common way to do that? So first of all, they're sedentary, but they're lazy motherfuckers anyway. You just don't install the wheel and they don't go anywhere. It's excess saturated fat. It's the most common insulin or diabetes promotion model. It's just a gold standard.
Then they also pick the rodents that are also more likely.
Oh, for sure. They sometimes just come type 2 diabetic right out of the womb, which is sweet. Not sweet. Sweet for research, not cool for the rats. Although, do you guys think they really care? Like, if they actually, up the rat's level of intelligence and be like, how do you feel like being a lab rat? They'd be like, yeah, I get fed all the time. All the saturated fats I want. I give a fuck about anything. It's sweet. But, are they, Crystal, do they have mixed pairs of rats?
Yeah, you order it specifically for certain strain, the ZDF rat model, and then you would feed them, you would get this giant thing of smelled like coconut oil sugar mixture, and you would pack them into balls, and that's what they would feed off.
And they love it.
Oh, yeah.
Sounds great. I wish aliens would come to study us. Can you imagine aliens come down and we're like, we're going to do this voluntarily? Who wants to be in an overfeeding study? Like, fucking free shit. Can I train? Not sure. Awesome. All right. So people freak out and say, oh my God, all that extra carbohydrate is going to make me diabetic. Well, guess what? Extra fat makes you diabetic just the same. Once you get, I had a Facebook post about this a couple weeks ago, once you get into hypercaloric condition with a sedentary lifestyle, the differences in diabetic proclivities with macronutrient ratio differences is like 5%. It's like barely noticeable. And because you're a bodybuilder, because you're not over fat, hopefully, okay, and you're the opposite of sedentary, if you're very physically active, you have decent genetics, not have type 2 diabetes when you're like 35 or some shit, then you should almost not worry at all about high carbohydrate intake. And some other good news for you, what group of athletes that take an obscene amount of carbohydrates but have almost no type 2 diabetes to speak of? Endurance athletes, absolutely. They take in, people say like super paleo, anti-carb people will be like, carbs are the devil, they cause diabetes. Explain, marathon runners. They eat like 800 grams of carbs a day, even though they weigh, like 60 kilos or something. And type 2 diabetes in marathon runners almost completely unheard of. Because their physical activity rates are completely off the charts and they're So how to prevent type 2 diabetes for the most part? Stay lean, stay very physically active, and you'll be in the clear. Unless you're like slamming just irresponsible levels of growth hormone. And then you'll at least be jacked, maybe. So, yeah, there was a guy at a gym in New York who, he was on like really fun levels of growth hormone, and he just got all the negative effects and just a few of the positives. So he had like the biggest gut I've ever seen on a human being who was not that jacked. But he was like super lean, just huge gut. What the fuck happened to that guy? It just sucks, right? You get the supplement, you're like, I'm going to be the man, and then you just get all the shitty effects. I don't know. So anyway, so what are some of the implications of this? Well, you know how we make fun of bro bodybuilders for clean eating? Yeah, it's a fucking stupid term. You don't wash your food in Listerine or some shit like that. Right? Brush your teeth after every bite. That's clean eating. It might be back, according to this. Maybe it's a good idea. When you see people eating like, M&Ms on their mass phase, the question isn't, oh, those are toxic, they're not clean, they're not approved. The question is, couldn't you be eating more carbohydrates and less fat to maximize total area under the curve of insulin secretion and thus get more jacked over the long term? Broderick Chavez calls fat a throwaway nutrient after minimums have been met. Because it doesn't really do much. It doesn't grow tons of muscle. Obviously, protein's not in the debate. It has to meet its needs. But after that, carbohydrate seems likely to stimulate further anabolism if consumed at high levels. And at the very least, if clean eating isn't back, because remember, nobody said shit about the source of carbohydrates. Can you, you guys know what pop chips are? Or like the super low-fat baked Lays and shit like that? That shit's clean, quote-unquote. Like, most bodybuilders, that's not fucking clean, but it has a shitload of carbohydrate, very little fat. You can still IFYM the shit out of that. But IFYM starts to look a little bit different, and the high-fat junk food doesn't seem to be nearly as present. One interesting thing is how many of you guys follow like professional bodybuilders on Instagram or something like that? Mostly for jacking off. I want to look like him one day. Oh yeah. Fuck, is this going to be on the tape? As usual, this is probably going to go to RP Plus and Nick Shaw's going to cover it. So. I'm getting fired from RP sooner or later. Enjoy while it lasts. All right. So, if you follow bodybuilders, especially those who are using farm, which I'll talk about in just a second, you'll see like, I've been having some cheat meals, time to clean things up in this next week. What the fuck does clean things up mean? Do we like lower your calories? Or, because you can like, how many of you guys know IFYM is? This is a joke test. right? How come you just fucking stuff cheat meals into your macros and you're just fine, right? What they probably allude to, whether or not they know it, is cheat meals have a shitload of fat in them, and clean things up means go back to chicken, rice, blah, 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 which has really low levels of fat and super high levels of carbohydrate to get these kinds of benefits. And when most bodybuilders at a high level do a mass phase, they do a bulking phase, you guys have heard of like the super growth thing, the clean bulk or whatever. I think this is what they're going for, is to keep fat levels lower while keeping carbohydrate levels higher. It's exaggerated highly, we'll get to in just a sec, it's exaggerated highly in people who use farms, specifically the insulin growth hormone and anabolics combo, because if you're using insulin, you want fat levels to be as low as possible, because then fats aren't, if you shoot insulin and eat tons of fats, you're just going to get super fat. It's super simple. And if you're shooting insulin, you have to justify it with high carbohydrate intakes, otherwise you'll pass out and die. So if you're using insulin, yes, you are eating so many carbs that you run into your hypercaloric top end and just don't have a lot of fats left to eat. But if you're shooting enough insulin that says you need 800 grams of carbs a day, and you have to eat like 5,000 calories a day, you pretty much down to 40 grams of fat right there, because that tops it out. Does that make sense? So a lot of this goes with drug use, but it probably you don't have to be on farm to benefit from those. As a matter of fact, Jared Feather, do you guys know who Jared Feather is by any chance? Yeah. Best genetics of all time, fuck that guy. It's on camera, motherfucker. So Jared Feather is drug-free. I know it's as crazy as it sounds. And he has done his first high-carb mass recently, where he kept his fats for, I think, either 6 weeks or 8 weeks. He kept his fats at 45 grams per day, but for like a cheat meal or two a week. And he basically gained a shitload of weight and looks way bigger, and he's just not that much fatter like I would have expected. He's like a revolution. Another individual that I used to work with for a long time, a friend of mine, he tried it as well, not through me, just actually through Jared, and also kept his carbs very high, fats very low, and he's as drug-free as they come, and he had huge benefits. And this is a guy that I used to feed him like 200 grams of fat per day for him to gain weight, which is a lot of nut butter. Does you hear people say, I love peanut butter? 200 grams of fat per day, you're not going to like peanut butter for too long. You're going to change your mind on that shit. So, does it work in drug-free people? Well, insulin is anabolic in drug-free individuals, for sure. It's anabolic in everybody, but it has to be over long-term intake of high area under the curve. It's not just that insulin spike post-workout that's going to get it. Does that make sense? All righty.
I was asking, was the source of the carbohydrates metal, simple or complex, or you trying to get a big spike, or is it constant release of insulin all the time?
So the area under the curve is what's most important. So the glycemic index only determines how fast the insulin is secreted. So if you have low glycemic carbohydrate foods, if you can eat all of them through the day, the sum total of insulin secretion is going to be identical. It's just not as fast. If you're big enough and you have a low enough appetite and you have to have enough calories while massing, you have to have higher glycemic versions, because you can't slam enough low glycemic. You just don't get hungry for it often enough, and you're just going to get... You guys ever done a massing phase where it's time to eat the next meal and the last meal is like fucking right here still? Like, it's still in your esophagus and you're like, okay. This is just like fucking losing in Tetris. Like, the fucking blocks just start adding up. So a lot of people will use higher glycemic versions of carbohydrates and do big workout shakes and stuff simply to get that volume of carbohydrates in. How many of you guys have heard like the Jay Cutler stories? Anyone? So Jay Cutler, you may be familiar with him. He's a quarterback in American football. Just kidding. People like every now and again, because he's like in the United States, American football is really big. And like, oh, Jay Cutler, he's a football player. Like, no, he's fucking not. He's a fucking pro bodybuilder, damn it. He's Mr. Olympia. So Jay Cutler started his diet for the Olympia at like 1,200 grams of carbs. And would go down to like 800. Okay? So they asked him once on tape, and this is on YouTube, you can type it in, they're like, what would your favorite cheat meal be? He's like, nothing. They're like, can you rephrase that? He's like, I don't want to eat. I don't remember the last time I was hungry. I fucking hate eating. I can't stand this shit anymore. People post on Instagram, other bodybuilders, I want a cheeseburger, I want that. He's like, if I had a free meal, I would just not eat. I would just skip a meal. That's how much food he had to eat to maintain his size while losing fat, for Christ's sake. So at 1,200 grams of carbs a day, can you eat low glycemic carbohydrates for the most part? Maybe. How many of you guys think you can eat like whole grain bread, pasta, and shit? 1,200. Fuck, that gets hard, right? So some of it's going to have to be high glycemic. That's probably the most realistic concern. For the pharma side, if you're shooting fast-acting insulin, you have to have high glycemic carbs, otherwise you'll pass the fuck out before anything happens. So that's more of like a real world concern. So the answer is no, you can get away with low glycemic, and that's probably healthier, etc., because of all the fiber, etc. But there's another real world concern. If you're having 800 grams of carbohydrates from whole grains, fruits, and veggies, what are your shits gonna look like? Bloody, and you'll be at the hospital half dead. We'll get to you in just a sec. There's a gentleman back there. You had your hand up.
Yeah, we're just talking about when you were going for like your clean bulk. Would that not just be simply a slight reduction in calories that would then limit the amount of fat gain, rather than actually the quality of food?
That's one way to think about it for sure. Yeah, so like the clean bulk versus dirty bulk or whatever. I fucking hate those terms.
If you change a burger to like chicken and rice, you're probably taking 500 calories off.
Oh, for sure. So we're coming at this from a more scientific approach of we've capped our calories first, which is what you're supposed to do. It's okay, 5,000 calories, that's what I need. Now we're going to determine how to fill them in. Should we fill them in with pretty high-fat foods, or should we fill them in with quote-unquote clean foods, which are high-carb? Yeah, that would make more sense for sure. Right, we're going to go to you in just a sec, right here, sir.
Yeah, about the high glycemic and low glycemic indexing. I personally tried the high carb and low fat, and when I adapted to high carb, I did 6 months on it, and I kind of bust through 85 to 89. I was stuck at 85, and I went on high carb, but I was finding it difficult with the fiber. I was always bloated and other things, so I switched over to high glycemic carbs, and I felt so much flatter around the waist and everything else, and I wasn't bloated and constantly just felt pumped 24/7 basically.
Yeah.
And I kept my fiber really low, and seems to be working perfectly fine. But what's your view when it comes to obviously doing high carbs, and what's your view on fiber?
As long as you meet them.
Yeah, because the vegetables and salads, and then getting low glycemic carb as well, adding fiber from that as well, like the whole grain or something, like brown rice or something, or that just went through the roof, the fiber, and I started getting upset stomach again.
Yeah. So there's a range of fiber intakes. There's minimum fiber for like World Health Organization to meet the minimum standards of fiber intake, and then there's a top end where you start to get really sick. The kind of populations that run to the top end, other than fitness fanatics and other retards like us that like to fuck with our own eating in a Western country, why can't you just eat normally? I'm sure you've had relatives and friends say shit like that. And then you're like, well, motherfucker, come over here and tell me that shit. And they do, and you're like, I can't actually fight, please. I thought this would keep people away, but it hasn't. So, outside of exotic eaters, there are, countries in the developing world in which they eat such low-quality whole grains that in order to get enough calories, they have so much fiber that it starts to fuck with nutrient absorption, and also, of course, the shitting and the bloating. So I would say that if you are really having trouble with high fiber on a high carb approach, lower the fiber intake by choosing more processed or more glycemic index foods, but don't just wholesale replace them. Just take like half or 2/3 of your foods, or maybe 1/3 of your foods, switch to high glycemic, especially around the workout window, and then see how that fiber reduction handles. So if you're like 80 grams of fiber or above, usually people start to shit their guts out with 80 grams and above. Try going to 60 and see how you feel. If you feel great at 60, hey, look, high fiber intake is associated with colon health and all this other shit. So if you're somewhere between the 30 gram range and the 80 gram range, for most people, fiber is pretty good. So if you can shoot for like 50, 60, whatever kind of foods it takes to do that, awesome. If you're at 90 and you feel fucking great, hey, fucking 90 it up. Who gives a shit? And I wouldn't drop below 30 grams of fiber most of the time because, again, it's colon health, et cetera, cholesterol. And fiber is a damn near panacea. It's really good for health. So as long as you're eating that minimum of 30 to 40, depending on for male, female, body size, etc. After that, you don't have to have any more. There's not any big advantage. You won't have trouble shitting when you're having 850 grams of cardio. That's for damn sure. Fuck, that flight over here was terrible.
Just the last one. What's again micronutrients?
I'm not a big fan of them. I'm totally kidding. Minimally important to getting you jacked. Pretty important to keeping you healthy. So make sure to eat a variety of foods, starting with veggies, fruits, whole grains in that order, lean meats, and you get most of your micronutrients just fine. There are ones that you can't. Supplementing is okay. I would recommend like 1 or half of a multivitamin per day. If you're running a ton of gear, you need some other micronutrients supplemented because anabolics run through some processes faster. If you want to find out about that, contact Roderick Chavez. That's his specialty. Shit. He's got me taking all kinds of fucking pills. It's fucking weird. I feel like a bro. I go to the pharmacy and I'm like, magnesium. I can't fucking believe I'm buying fucking magnesium by itself. People ask me too, like, does that grow muscle? I'm like, yeah, if you're on a shitload of fucking farm. Nobody ever gets that joke. Not really a joke. Interactions with pharmacists. I love it. Do we have a question over here somewhere? Yes.
Obviously, because insulin being so anabolic, with its effects on amino acid absorption as well, doesn't directly influence protein synthesis as soon as insulin is secreted.
Absolutely.
So would you supplement? Obviously, you have protein high protein meal with the carbohydrates.
I mean, so like I've said nothing about nutrient timing to this extent. We're just talking about daily macros. Does nutrient timing matter? Yeah, to a small extent, but I think all of your carbohydrate meals should have protein in them, simply because most meals should have protein. So every 3 to 5 hours, you're ingesting a bolus of high-quality proteins, which, if ingested with carbohydrates, should exert all those effects. So you're certainly not just like wake up, have like some apple juice, and then go 8 hours and then start eating protein in some fucking weird new fad diet. Which, by the way, have you guys tried apple cider vinegar? I've been using it. I'm immortal. I literally just ran into an elevator, picked up my phone. So, yeah, that's the new thing. I guess that means coconut oil is not the new thing anymore. It's like you like meet up with your health buddies, and you're like, I'm using coconut oil, and they're like, really? That's so last year. And you're like, oh, I'm late to all the fads. Shit.
Have you tried turmeric?
Fuck no. Is apple cider vinegar, is it good? Does it taste good? Anyone tried it? Apple cider vinegar? Have you actually tried it? What do you think?
I was using Carnastonica for like enduros, so that would be like beneficial. It tastes like ice.
Oh, right on. That's a hell of an endorsement. All right, question back there, yes.
Mike, a couple of questions.
Sure.
If you're going for this high carb approach, and protein set at 2 grams per kg, and you're doing things like oats, pasta, bread, broccoli, obviously protein sources are going to be tagged along with that. So what do you think about the overall quality of the diet in terms of protein, leucine content, all that stuff?
Yeah, that's a really good question. MyFitnessPal will fuck you in this regard. MyFitnessPal does not calculate protein quality. So when you get most of your protein from broccoli, it just counts it as fucking straight grams. For the purposes of calories, I count protein in plant sources as roughly 2/3 of what it's supposed to be. Why? Because you don't digest some of it. And on average, you probably only digest about 2/3 of the protein that you get from plant sources. The rest you just literally shit out. The absorption and triggering of anabolism side, we see a more efficiency loss there still. So I say we see another about 1/3 or 2/3 of efficiency loss there. So when I count protein sources from incomplete plant sources, I count them as usually about half of what they really are. So if I get 4 grams of protein from whole grain bread, I count that 2/3 of that to calories per day, and only half of it, so 2 grams, for a high quality protein source per day. So to be completely honest, what I try to do is to shoot for like 80% of my protein coming in from whole food, lean meat, high leucine sources, and the rest of it I just assume will come from grains, etc. And it's going to be way more than 20%, but how much of that is quality is going to be about 20%. Does that make sense? So not all protein is created equal, unless you're a vegan or vegetarian and you're typically consuming vast quantities of low quality sources. That's not an issue. And a lot of the kinds of proteins that you get from grains, etc., they actually turn into kind of downstream derivatives of carbohydrates and enter the Krebs cycle pretty easily. So a lot of them will just kind of function as sort of pseudo-carbs, pseudo-fats, and they're not very anabolic to begin with. So I'd be very careful about counting whole grain bread as like, well, I can hit my macros. So I would say that if you're trying to hit your macros, mostly quality protein sources, and then don't worry too much about your grains. You see, you start to get, how the fuck do I start counting all these calories? You don't have to count calories super precisely. Just count them as they appear on the label, and then track your body weight. If you're gaining weight, it's too many calories. If you're losing weight, it's not enough. If you're steady, you're good to go, and then you can manipulate from there. Does that answer your question to some extent?
Absolutely, yeah.
Very cool. You said you had a couple of questions?
Yeah, the last one, not related to that at all. This whole high carb hypothesis, what implications does that have for dieting, if any at all?
Yeah. Man, so the implication it has for dieting is set your fats as low as they'll go right from the start. And then you just cut your carbs as you go, which I imagine bodybuilders doing for a while has given other people the idea that cutting carbs is what gets them lean. Which bodybuilders say, I'm starting to cut my carbs for my show. I think the reason they're doing that a lot of times is because that's the only place they can cut calories from. You're not going to cut your protein, and it's not the carb cutting that's making them leaner, it's the calorie cutting. Ideally, they could keep their carbs as high as possible. So I think that's the implication for dieting, is that you keep your carbs much higher than you otherwise would, which is pretty sweet. I'm gonna try this out myself in a couple of months when I start a big fat loss phase. And I'm going to start a fat loss phase with 500 grams of carbohydrate, which is fucking weird for me to even think about. But if it's 60 grams of fat, it actually is hypocaloric for me. So we'll see. If this turns out to be the case, boy, do we all feel stupid for having like way more fats and way fewer carbs on previous cuts, because we could have been that much more pumped, retained that much more muscle, etc., etc. As you guys know, it's pretty straightforward. Once you start cutting carbs, the clock on your cutting phase starts to run pretty high. You can only train on low carbs pretty hard for so long until you stab a little girl in the park for a cookie or some shit. Give me that cookie. Bitch. You're in court later, like, you called a 7-year-old girl a bitch and took her cookie. Like, I was on low carbs. I plead insanity. Get away. Just 10 hours of community service. Do you guys do that here in the UK? If it's a minor crime, you do, like, clean up the freeway or something? Sweet. Yeah.
Have you had any issues with people who've experienced with drowsiness within the past, or some people who are on a high carb diet that feeling more groggy?
Yep, I've heard that as a problem. I've heard some people who just genetically or for whatever lack of reason, if they try to do the high carb thing, they're so insulin sensitive that they start to, like, if they don't time their meals to within 30 minutes of each other, not 30 minutes back to back, but like if they miss a meal by 30 minutes, they go hypoglycemic because they fucking pass out and live for carbs. These are people who aren't even using insulin. So some people have pretty stable normal blood sugar and good regulation, and some people just fucking crash and spike. And those seem to be benefiting more from higher fats just to keep themselves at a steadier carbohydrate environment. Most people seem to respond pretty well to this. It also has a pretty good effect on appetite. When your fats are at minimum levels and you're slamming this much carbohydrate, as you approach your competition, if you especially lower the glycemic index of those carbs and increase fiber, your feelings of fullness can be pretty high. And something that Broderick told me, which is really funny, because him and I were looking at options for a class of drugs called anorectics. You guys ever hear of anorectic drugs? There's drugs that make you not want to eat. So obesity drugs. There's one particularly called sibutramine that's very well. I have never tried it. I'm looking forward to it. But you take sibutramine, food just doesn't ever look the same to you again. I think you could eat it, or you could not eat it. You guys know those weird motherfuckers at your work? They're like, oh my god, I was so busy, I forgot to eat for 8 hours. What the fuck is wrong with you? My brain tells me to eat fucking Cheetos every 30 minutes. Right? So we're looking at anorectics as a class, and we noticed that most bodybuilders at a high level, nobody even talks about hunger. Like, you look at the forums of like IFBB guys and shit, and they're talking about how to lose fat, how to gain muscle, how to not go nuts from too much like tren and shit like that. Like, oh, I didn't kill my cab driver today, success. But nobody really talks about hunger, and you're like, why the fuck not? And Broderick said that they eat such huge volumes of food in part because of the high carb, low fat approach, that it's just boring. He said most guys will quit diets when they're really jacked and trying to get lean because they're fucking bored of eating clean food all the time, and not because they're starving. How many of you guys have damn near starved to death on a cutting diet before? I sure as hell have. So if this shit can make me not hungry, that'll be sweet. Yeah. Yahoo. Yeah, whatever. I'm just kidding. That was mostly a joke. No worries. Have a seat, I guess. Do we have seats?
I was going to say, we'll have a break there.
Oh, yeah, we do have a break. Let's do one or two more questions if you guys have them, and then go to break. You with the red.
What's your opinion on intra-workout carbs, and have you sort of played about with that at all, or been used that in specific products?
I've been using them for a super long time. I don't really train unless I have intra-workout carbs. I think that if your training is less than 45 minutes to an hour long, it's a total moot point. If it's past an hour long, I think they have a really good benefit in supplying your nervous system with glucose, which is spoiled rotten and prefers to eat it. And it literally can make it makes a noticeable difference on how well the end of your workout goes. You guys know your workout can end in one of two ways. Like you're finishing curl and you're like, fuck, yes. You fucking drop your dumbbells, like, fuck you, I'm out. Just from a random person in the gym. The guy's like, right? And you're like, I could do more, but my workout just ran out of shit to work out, right? And then the other way your workout can end, the other extreme, is like you get to your last set of curls and you're like, I could just simply die right now curling. No one will know my great story that I have to offer, right? You like do like 1.5 curls, oh my god, you just have to leave the gym, you can't complete your workout. Intra-workout carbohydrates help you a little bit to be on the plus side, on the better side of that. I think they're cool, especially if you have workouts that last longer than an hour. If not, and chemically they're probably good for a little bit of anti-catabolism and things like that during your workout. And they kind of play into that post-workout window. So if you have been drinking intra-workout carbs, even if your absorption is down because you're in a sympathetic fight or flight state, as soon as you're post-workout, you're in your parasympathetic again, like you're on the train ride home, and you already have a bolus of carbohydrate and amino acid in there waiting for your muscles to just take up right away, as opposed to like if you wait 30 minutes after your workout to have your post-workout shake, that's another at least 30 minutes for it to get to your muscles. So now you're talking about an hour window. Does that make a big difference at any one time? Absolutely not. Does it make a big difference over a preparatory season, over a career? Some difference for sure. It baffles me, one little rant for you guys before we go to break. It baffles me how many people conflate optimization and simplicity/adherence. There's two very different discussions that are both incredibly valuable to have, but you've got to understand which discussion you're having, which debate you're having. So I'll say, yeah, it's probably a good idea to have intra-workout carbohydrates for anti-catabolism and the promotion of high-intensity training. And people will be like, really? So you must think it's also a good idea to have your protein and carb shake right after training? You can't wait 30 minutes. I'm like, yes, I think that's a good idea. And they're like, it fucking matters at all. Like, it matters at all. And they're like, it barely matters. I'm like, I agree with you. And they're like, so why do you do it? I'm like, well, fuck, I don't want to be getting second place on a fucking bodybuilding stage because that cocksucker took the intra-workout carbs and I didn't. You guys ever, can you imagine being a judge at the Mr. Olympia? You're like, all right, who looks like shit? Like, nobody. Everyone looks fucking amazing. You guys ever see the top 10 at the Olympia? You're like, are we just guessing here as to who's the best? Fuck. You want that tiny razor's edge? 0.5% matters, right? You guys ever see, like, a couple years back, Kai Green versus Phil Heath? They had to go through the mandatories like 10 fucking times because you're like, it's a guess at this point, right? You want that fucking extra edge. So optimization matters. So yeah, maybe it's a good idea to have your workout shake as soon as your workout is over. Yeah. And if it's up to you, why not do the best? I can understand optimization and anti-optimization argument for shit that's profoundly difficult. Let's say we found out through science that you have to wake up 3 times every night to ingest a bolus of supplements and food. Fuck that, right? Unless your Mr. Olympia is coming up, I'm not fucking waking up 3 times a night. Fuck that. But if you already have your Gatorade and whey protein with you at the gym, and you can either drink it when you get on the train, or you can drink it when you get off the train half an hour later, and drinking it when you get on is a little tiny bit better, why the fuck not just do that? Does that make sense? So a lot of you guys are trainers and coaches in your own right. Remember, when you're having this discussion with people, understand their perspective. Is adherence and simplicity more important to them, or is optimization more important to them? And then you understand that there's a spectrum between the two, and you can kind of align your discussion to that. So the good thing is if you live your life like a machine, then here are the things you should probably be doing that are tiny, tiny benefits, but they add up. If you want to have a good time and get pretty jacked and get pretty lean and get pussy or dick or both, whatever the fuck you're into, then that's how it works, right? Then you can just do regular bullshit and not worry about complications. Does that make sense? It kills me how many people don't seem to see those two as different things. You'll see people on Facebook that none of that shit fucking matters. One guy, I remember we had a nutrient timing article on Juggernaut. He's like, nutrient timing doesn't matter at all. And one guy replied to him, a really cheeky cunt, as you guys would say here. He was like, oh, so you can just eat most of your meals over 3 days of the week and then for 4 days starve? The guy never replied. It all means it just doesn't matter. I can have all my food in half the year, which is really fun, and the other half the year starve, which is not fun. Yahoo. Well, one question and we'll hit it. This better be fucking good. All right. All right.
Along these lines, we talk about optimization versus perfection.
Mm-hmm.
So, in terms of applying this, then, is it on and off, or is it scalable? So if you say, okay, if you took more carbohydrates, but not to the extreme,
yes,
you get better results.
Absolutely scalable.
So if someone's only working out 3 times a week, and they say, okay, just up your carbs a bit, cut your fats down, but it's not that miserable land diet. It's still be better than.
So let's take a really simple example of someone who trains with really high volumes and trains like 6 days a week. if they want to eat, for their caloric surplus. If they want 50% fats, 50% carbs, that's good. They're going to gain some muscle. It's going to be sweet. If they want to go to 80% carbs, 20% fat, better. If they want to go to just 10% fat in the surplus versus 90% carbs, like super clean eating, better still. And if they want super, super high fats, a little worse. So it is a spectrum. I don't think there's some crazy threshold. Like, unless it's 800 grams of carbs, dick happens. In 801, you're just fucking Superman. 802, you're dead. So that's the kind of margins we're working with. That'd be so sweet. Yeah. Did I answer your question to some extent? So it is scalable, absolutely.
The fact that you're getting the extra insulin to get this effect rather than the calories, is there a point, or is it literally the more insulin you're getting with your calorie allotment, the better?
Yeah, the more the better, I'd say. Yeah. And as a drug-free athlete, you can't really get crazy super physiological insulin levels like that anyway. So it's not like you're going to pass out or have some kind of crazy health risks. How much insulin is too much? The answer to that is you have to start injecting it for that. And then, like, I don't know, all kinds of weird shit happens. There are stories of people, what the fuck was that guy's name? There was a guy from South Africa. I don't think he ever competed in bodybuilding. But he weighed, I think, 200 kilos. And he was a little taller, but there's a picture of him with Jay Cutler. And he makes Jay Cutler look small, as prime. And this guy was notorious for slamming, I think it was 100 units of insulin. Do you know his name? Say what? Oh, it's another question. Yeah. A quick story. This guy is known for slamming, I think, 100 units of insulin and going to an all-you-can-eat sushi place and basically putting it out of business. He died when he was 32. Don't do shit like that. Yeah.
I was going to ask about P ratio, and if you've looked into that at all.
Totally.
With regards to excess calorie intake or surplus, and regards to like how that changes different people's results with high carb, high fat intake.
I think the high carb benefits the P ratio because it probably doesn't make you fat as fast, and it keeps you on the plus side of that ratio for longer. Keeps you leaner for longer, which is probably good.
So kind of like irrespective of what someone's P ratio would be, a high carb intake would still be better.
Probably, yeah. Because remember what we're fighting against. People say this, so you've heard, I'm sure you guys have heard this before. If you're lean, high carbs are good. But if you're super fat, high carbs are bad. How the fuck are they bad? Well, the insulin causes you fat storage. So then what's the alternative? What should we fill a hypercaloric window with? Let's say, well, fats. Motherfucker, they go to fat anyway, period, right? So there's no way that you're going to lose out. There's no way you're going to lose out to fats. Like, they're the fucking worst by far. There's nothing that makes you fatter than excess fat. You want to have a discussion about that? I'm more than willing to entertain that, right? Does that answer your question to some extent? So, at whatever P ratio you guys, how many of you know what P ratio is? Right? It's the ratio between fat and muscle that you have, and if you are super lean, as you gain weight from a lean, let's say you start at 5% fat. People who gain weight from 5% to 10% while resistance training are going to gain a bigger fraction of muscle than people who go from 5% to 15% or something like that. And way bigger than people who go from 30% to 35%. You guys ever see someone at like 35%? They're going to start a bulk. Like, where to? Right? So the problem is, if you bulk at some super high body fats, you just get a lot fatter than you otherwise would. People say, well, just lower your carbs, eat more fats, you won't get as fat. I'm not fucking entirely sure how that's supposed to happen. Well, you see insulin. Well, insulin theory comes out and makes you fat out of fucking nowhere. Fats are fat. You literally just fucking put them right in the cell the way they are. They anabolize super, super easily. So I think the insulin still wins on that regard. Is it healthy to be consuming that much carbohydrate when you're over fat? Probably not, but that's a different situation. So for someone I would never recommend someone gain weight when they're super fat anyway. But for individuals that are very over fat, I would put them on a high monounsaturated fat diet because that has very good health benefits. Should you be slamming 800 grams of carbs if you're 35% fat? Fucking probably not.
Just to go on that point, say you've had someone who's been 35% body fat for 10, 20 years and they're coming to you for a recomp and you get them down to 10, 5%. Would their P ratio obviously still be different than the person who's been 5 to 10% their entire life? And so when you're trying to build them back up, do you still need to kind of be aware of the fact that their ability to shuttle nutrients into either muscle or fat is going to be compromised?
On the one side, they have the genetics and kind of the history to make sure that the fat rebound is really great. On the other side, because they have just cut for so long, they're probably really sensitive to muscle growth as well. I'm not sure the two cancel each other out. In general, I would say you need to be very careful with people who have been very over fat. put them on the low side of every single mass gaining protocol. Because if you're just like, because like skinny, me like a 15-year-old kid who's pretty skinny and he's just started lifting weights, what's your best advice? Just eat meat, eat fuck all after that, enjoy your life and get big. Right? You don't say shit like that to people who've been 35% fat. Right? Because if you tell them, go on your way and have whatever you want, they're going to come back for like Jabba the Hutt.